disassembling your Invictus Auto. To start, you will need to remove the pocket clip. And to remove the pocket clip, you will need a T6 driver. When inserting the tool into the hardware, I always use my thumb to guide it so that I don't scratch anything, and then make certain it's fully seated, and with firm pressure in the palm of your hand, apply force and rotate. You don't need to remove the hardware completely out. It should stick in the pocket clip, and you should be able to remove it as one complete unit. Like so. They have a little bit of Loctite in the threads, and that's what's keeping it floating in there. If you want to put Loctite in it, this has Loctite Blue, which is a fairly light Loctite. Next step is going to be removing the screws from the body, and to do that you're going to transition from T6 to a hex drive, and this is a 5/64 hex. Same again, I always use the thumb to guide it in so I don't scratch anything. Apply direct pressure, rotate. You always want to make sure that you're fully seated into the piece of hardware. If you don't, you could strip it and it could be stuck that way for a very long time. So you can see this hardware has red Loctite in it. Each piece of hardware is the same length. As we transition up to the head, so you don't have to worry about mixing them up. Now, all the while, keep pressure on the handle, and you're going to transition now to another hex bit, which is a 3/32 hex bit. Again, use the thumb. There's lots of cosmetic stuff here you don't want to scratch. This one, make certain you seat very deeply. Rotate out. And there you go. So when you start doing this, you want to make sure you're in the locked position. When you start doing this, it's better if you start in the locked position. That'll hold everything together. I didn't do that, but fortunately I was squeezing it. So when you go to unlock it, this is now going to allow you to take the handle apart. Now, when you take the handle apart, as you saw, I gently pried it at this point. Don't pry from the bottom. You could bend the handle. If the stop pin comes out with this section of the handle, return it to this section, because you're going to need the stop pin in this process. So at this point, I've disengaged the lock and I'm holding both pieces. And now this is where it gets tricky, because you need to create a little bit of space. So what I'm doing is easing the blade up off of the pivot. I'll turn around and show you. See how I have the blade eased up off of the pivot? That's going to create the space to dismantle and not launch the spring. So that's a very important step. You don't want to launch this spring. To reinstall the blade, this is where this gets tricky. This spring, as you can see, it comes through here. I'm just going to show you this in case you're confronted with this. So this is how this spring installs into this pocket. It's the larger of the two holes. Right? So you can see and feel the spring come through the hole. So when it's time to reassemble, this blade. Sorry, I was doing it backwards. So this slot captures this spring, and I rotate it around at a slight angle till I clear the stop pin, and then reinstall it onto the pivot. And again, I'm going to take it and I'm going to create a little bit of gap. See how I sort of have the pivot now flush with the blade in here? So I've created a little bit of a gap so that I can reinstall the pin and the spring. This is the really fun part. So basically, you'll tip it just a little bit, and you're kind of hunting for a sweet spot. There's no force involved. You just kind of want to get it. Oop, it just popped out, but that's okay. Ah, that's what we're trying to avoid. So again, slide up onto the pivot a little bit, the spring in place. Let's see. Nope, we sunk back down. When the blade's touching this plane of the handle, there's not enough room to get the button underneath it. So I like to, don't like to spread it out that much. Okay, so now, it looks a little cockeyed, but that's okay. You can see where the pin is trapped by the blade. And at this point, while holding it all together, insert the handle. Should all click nicely into place over the button. And then repeat the process. So when you get this, just set it in gently. And likewise with all of this hardware. We're going to set it in, but we're not going to tighten it. Okay, so right now, a slight misalignment. Don't use the threads to pull the handle into alignment. All right, so that one's not cooperating, so we're going to start down here and work our way up. So you see I'm not setting them in all the way. Just want to get this started gently. So we want all of these things to align before we make them tight. Oops. Fairly firmly. You don't need to get too intense about it. As you can see, it's drawn the seam shut. So the seam looks good. all the way around. Now, you can test. If this is sticking, you're just gonna have to use a very firm pressure. So, and that's how you do it. And then last step, turning the pocket clip. Pocket clip, same thing, get each one started. You don't want to tighten it down and potentially create tension, tug out of alignment, because these threads inside the handle are fairly delicate. So the back one's tight, front one's tight. There you have it.